Today's case takes us all the way back to 1980, to the Northern Territory of Australia. A case with a miscarriage of justice. But to some, it was just justice. Two parents fighting for truth and freedom, and a story that inspired many a television quote and even a movie.
There wasn't time to go and tell people. I just yelled out, has anyone got a torch? The dingo's got my baby. Dingo's got the baby!
Hey, I think I hear a dingo eating your baby.
Yeah, well, I have lost my fiancé, the poor baby.
Maybe the dingo ate your baby.
Tropic thunder.
I'm sorry a dingo ate your baby.
You know that's a true story. Lady lost a kid.
Get out.
This is the case of Lindy, Michael, and Azaria Chamberlain. Alice Lynn Murchison, lovingly known as Lindy, was born on 4 March 1948 in Whakatane, New Zealand, to parents Avis and Cliff. Her family moved to Victoria, Australia when she was only 20 months old. Lindy's father was a pastor, and they were members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Lindy matriculated in Benalla in 1965. And she went on to work vacation jobs as a waitress, a shop assistant, a clerk, a receptionist, and a bookkeeper. In 1968, she met fellow Seventh-day Adventist Michael Chamberlain, and the two started dating. Michael Lee Chamberlain was born on 27 February 1944 in Christchurch, New Zealand, as the eldest son to his parents, Greta and Ivan. His father served as a warrant officer in the Royal New Zealand Air Force during World War II, while his mother was involved with the administration of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in southern New Zealand. Educated at Lincoln High School and Christchurch Boys High School, Chamberlain commenced studies at the University of Canterbury, but after converting to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1965, he left the university and migrated to Australia. He subsequently studied at Avondale College and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Theology in 1969, which is the same year that Lindy and Michael were married on 18 November 1969. After graduating from university, Michael worked as a Seventh-day Adventist minister in Tasmania, where Lindy gave birth to their first child, a son that they named Aidan in 1973. In 1974, Lindy received her dressmaking, tailoring, and drafting certificate at Launceston Technical College, and she specialized in making wedding dresses. In 1976, the couple welcomed their second son that they named Regan. In 1977, the family moved to Queensland, where Michael produced and presented a radio program called The Good Life, a commentary on lifestyle and culture throughout the northern parts of the state. The Chamberlains' third child, a daughter that they named Azaria, was born in Mount Isa on 11 June 1980. When Azaria was 2 months old, the family would go on a camping trip to Darwin in the Northern Territory, where Michael wanted to fish for barramundi. Lindy, however, had visited Uluru when she was 16 and wanted to visit it again. Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, is a large sandstone formation in the center of Australia. The area around the formation is home to an abundance of springs, water holes, rock caves, and ancient paintings. Uluru is one of Australia's most recognisable natural landmarks and has been a popular destination for tourists since the late 1930s. It is also one of the most important Indigenous sites in Australia. So, the family made a compromise and travelled to Uluru and arrived on the 16th of August 1980 with the intention of camping there for 3 days. The family hiked and explored, and several photos of them were documented. They also had several encounters with dingoes after making camp at Uluru, including on the night of 17 August, when Michael fed one of them a piece of crust. Shortly before 8 p.m, Lindy put Azaria to bed in her wicker bassinet in their tent and returned to the campfire, where they had been having a conversation with another family staying at the camp. After Michael started hearing Azaria crying, Lindy got up to check on her and saw a glimmer of a dingo coming out of the tent. She told the dingo, "Get out of here!" Looking through the tent opening, she didn't see Azaria, so she ran in and saw that Azaria was gone, and she started screaming, "The dingo's got my baby! Oh my God, the dingo's got my baby!" Which is when all hell broke loose. It was pitch black and no one could see a thing. No one knew where Azaria or the dingo went. Fellow campers drove to the police station, who came out to the campsite, and searches for Azaria started. But the Chamberlains started losing hope, thinking that a dingo would kill Azaria, and if she did manage to survive, she would freeze if she wasn't found soon. They started chain searches with the rest of the campers. With Azaria wearing all white, they were hoping that they would be able to spot her even in the dark night. The police expected to interview a hysterical couple trying to find their child, maybe even angry, but instead they found two parents calmly resigned to the fact that they wouldn't find their daughter alive. Dingo tracks were seen around and inside the tent. Blood was also seen on the tent, mattress and other items like clothing on the tent itself, and near the carry basket that she had been sleeping in. Shortly after the alarm was raised, trackers started following the dingo prints until they mixed with shoe prints of humans on the road. They also saw drag marks in the sand in two places, where there was a shallow depression in the sand where a bundle had been set down, apparently while the animal rested. The depressions contained the imprint of a knitted garment, and next to one, small dark patches in the sand, which they took to be blood. The searches for the night were stopped, and the couple retired to a motel nearby to grieve their daughter. But their nightmare would only get worse once the media got hold of their story. By the next morning, a local news station got hold of the news of Azaria being allegedly taken by a dingo, and that same day an interview was done with the couple.
When we saw the spots of blood in the tent, as we looked, we realised it must have been a very quick event. And this morning when we saw on the blanket the sharp, jagged marks in that very thickly woven blanket, we knew that that was a powerful beast in the sharp teeth.
There wasn't time to go and tell people. I just yelled out, "Has anyone got a torch? The dingo's got my baby."
I yelled at the dog to scare it off, and then it sort of registered on my mind as I was running to the tent, because I thought the kitties are in there. When I got in the tent, it was just nothing. And I called to my husband. I didn't really couldn't believe the evidence of my own eyes, and I called to Michael that dingo's got the baby.
A cold shiver went up my spine. I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. And I rushed into the tent and we looked around quickly and couldn't see anything. I thought, my hat. And I rushed out into the blackness and I felt as hopeless as I'd ever felt in my life.
Several searches were organized to look for Azaria, but sadly, she was never found. About a week after her disappearance, the jumpsuit, along with the singlet, and the booties and nappy that she had been wearing was found, about 4,000 meters away from the tent, and the singlet was inside out. The jumpsuit had slight tears in it, and it was blood-stained around the neck, indicating that Azaria was more than likely dead. A matinee jacket that she had been wearing was not found at that time. From the day Azaria went missing, Lindy and Michael Chamberlain had maintained that a dingo took their child, and early on in the case, the facts showed that for the 2 years before Azaria went missing, the chief ranger had been writing to the government urging a dingo cull and warning of imminent human tragedy, stating that dingoes were becoming increasingly cheeky, approaching and sometimes even biting people. People, however, were suspicious, as no human had ever reportedly, up to that date, been killed by a dingo, and no one had ever heard of a dingo taking a baby. The average male dingo weighs around 15.8 kg or 35 pounds, and a female would weigh around 14.1 kilograms or 31 pounds. Azaria weighed around 10 pounds at the time of her disappearance, and people doubted that such a small canine would be able to pick up a baby and run away, disappearing with Azaria in its mouth. Dead dingoes shot in Ayers Rock following the disappearance were dissected by veterinarians looking for either human bone or human protein. Tears in the fibers of Azaria's clothing were studied. Did the tears appear to be caused by a dingo's teeth or by some human instrument, is what they were looking for. At Cleland Park Wildlife Reserve in Adelaide, dingoes were tossed meat wrapped in a baby's nappy so that the nappy could be studied and compared to the one that was found from Azaria. From these various efforts, investigators began to in fact build a case for murder. False rumors also soon began to fly, and people were analyzing the Chamberlains' behavior on every step and turn. People started saying that Azaria's name meant sacrifice in the wild. The Book of 1001 Unusual Baby Names, in which Lindy found the name, identified it as meaning blessed by God. In the current book, The Complete Book of Baby Names, Azaria is said to mean helped by God. Either way you translate it, it comes nowhere near the rumor. People also started saying that the couple always dressed Azaria in black. At one doctor's appointment, Lindy and Azaria wore matching black dresses with red trim. Lindy liked strong colors and also wore them herself. The black dress was actually initially made for Regan when he was a baby, and Azaria had inherited it. It was literally one black dress. There were a lot of other pink and white ones that Azaria had worn, but according to people, it was proof that they were, in fact, part of some sort of cult. Newspapers fueled suspicions that the Chamberlains killed their baby, possibly as a religious sacrifice, or that Azaria might have been killed to atone for the sins of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Reporters frequently observed that the many Australians concluded from televised interviews with the Chamberlains that the couple's demeanour didn't match what they would expect from a couple that had just tragically lost their child.
People struggled to reconcile this brutal act with a wild but reportedly timid dog. And when Azaria's clothing was found a week later, almost intact, Lindy's reaction did more than raise questions.
Were you surprised Azaria's clothing was found hardly torn?
No, not really. Not having watched wild dingoes feed on cattle and things like that.
They use their feet like hands and pull back the skin as they go, and they'll just peel it like an orange.
Lindy turned the public completely against her, so any mother could talk like that in a seemingly unfeeling way about her child. That did more damage than anything in the world.
The initial inquiry into Azaria's death was held in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory, and it started on December 16, 1980. Evidence was laid out to present human intervention in Azaria's death. The evidence suggested that the clothes were put in place, not dragged by a dingo, and that the clothes showed signs of being removed from the baby by a human. They also made it known that no dingo saliva had been found on Azaria's clothing. But Lindy stated that Azaria had been wearing a matinee jacket over her clothing, which had not been found. Lindy Chamberlain was questioned, but generally they failed to show her as a mother with either the will or motive to kill her own 9-week-old daughter. Conclusively, the coroner supported the Chamberlains' account of Azaria's disappearance and death, finding that a dingo did in fact take Azaria.
I doth find that Azaria Chamberlain, a child then of 9 weeks of age, met her death when attacked by a wild dingo. I further find that neither the parents of the child nor either of their remaining children were in any degree whatsoever responsible for this death. I find that after her death, the body of Azaria was taken from the dingo and disposed of by a person or persons name unknown.
The coroner chastised the police for shoddy work. He felt that some police officers may have been against the idea of a dingo being involved, and that their so-called evidence against the Chamberlains did not stand up. The matter was closed, and no charges were brought against the Chamberlains. Some, who allegedly felt attacked by the coroner, vowed to set things right as they saw it. And on September 19, 1981, officers of the Northern Territory Police conducted a 4.5-hour search of the Chamberlains' home, seizing over 300 items, ranging from items of clothing to scissors to the yellow Torana that they had driven to Ayers Rock in. A detective informed Lindy that the search was preempted by the findings of a British forensic expert who concluded from examining the baby's clothing that no dingo had been involved in her disappearance, to which Lindy coolly reacted, "Oh, I didn't know there were any dingo experts in London." The Supreme Court ended up quashing the findings of the initial inquest and ordered a second inquest in November of 1981. The second inquest into Azaria's death opened in Alice Springs on December 14, 1981. The barrister assisting the coroner made it very clear from his questioning of the Chamberlains that his belief was that Lindy Chamberlain took Azaria from the campsite on the evening of 17 August 1980 and murdered her in their yellow Torana with a sharp instrument, most likely a pair of scissors. Many of the questions directed at the Chamberlains concerned the presence of blood in the family's car. For instance, did you notice any blood staining inside or outside the car when you cleaned it? Do you recall cleaning blood off the seats? The barrister called biologist Joy Cool, who testified that she found fetal blood beneath the passenger seat of the Torana. James Cameron, the forensic expert, claimed in his testimony that the tears found on Azaria's jumpsuit had not been caused by a dingo. He also stated that based on ultraviolet photographs of Azaria's jumpsuit, that there was an incised wound around the neck of the jumpsuit. In other words, he said that Azaria's throat had been cut. He also stated that there was an imprint of a hand of a small adult on the jumpsuit visible in the photographs. The coroner, who performed the second inquest and recorded findings as to the cause and manner of Azaria's death, stated that although the evidence was to a large degree circumstantial, a jury properly instructed could arrive at a verdict. With regard to the clothing evidence, he surmised that the Chamberlains knew dingoes were in the area, attempted to simulate a dingo attack, recovered Azaria's buried body, removed her clothing, damaged it by cutting it, rubbed it in vegetation, and deposited the clothing for later recovery. Following this and other findings, on the 2nd February 1982, Lindy Chamberlain was charged with murder, and Michael as being an accessory after the fact, and they were committed to stand trial.
Lindy and Michael Chamberlain will go on trial. In a sensational end to the second inquest, Mrs. Chamberlain will be tried for murder, Mr. Chamberlain for assisting his wife to escape punishment.
The Chamberlains' trial started on the 3rd of September 1982, and Lindy shocked everyone when she showed up to court heavily pregnant. The prosecution's theory was that in a 10-minute absence from the campfire, Lindy returned to the tent, changed into tracksuit pants, took Azaria to the car, used scissors to cut Azaria's throat, waited for Azaria to die, hid the body in a camera case in the car, cleaned up blood on everything, including the outside of the camera case, removed the tracksuit pants, obtained baked beans for her son from the car, returned to the tent, did some sort of something to leave blood splashes there, and brought her son Aiden back to the campfire without ever attracting any attention of any other campers to herself. She then went back to the tent and raised the cry that the dingo took the baby. It was alleged that at a later time, while other people from the campsite were searching, she then disposed of the body. The key evidence supporting this allegation was Azaria's jumpsuit, as well as a highly contentious forensic report, claiming to have found evidence of fetal hemoglobin in stains on the front seat of the Chamberlains' 1977 Corona hatchback. Fetal hemoglobin is present in infants 6 months and younger, and Azaria was 9 weeks old at the time of her disappearance. The prosecution's expert testimony for forensic evidence included that of James Cameron, a scientist who had also given crucial evidence in a case in England, which was later overturned when his expert evidence was proven to be incorrect. Lindy Chamberlain was questioned about the garments that Azaria was wearing. She stated that Azaria was wearing a matinee jacket over the white jumpsuit, but the jacket was not found with the other garments. She was also questioned about the fact that Azaria's singlet, which was inside the jumpsuit, was found inside out. She insisted that she never put a singlet on her babies inside out, and that she was most particular about this. This statement conflicted with the state of the garments when they were collected as evidence, when they had been arranged by the investigating officer for photographs. In Lindy's defense, eyewitness evidence was presented of dingoes having been seen in the area on the evening of 17 August 1980, and all witnesses claimed to believe the Chamberlain's story. One witness, a nurse, also reported having heard a baby's cry after the time when the prosecution alleged that Azaria had been murdered. With regard to the timing of the baby's cry and Mrs. Chamberlain's whereabouts, the prosecution also claimed that the Chamberlains convinced fellow camper and witness Sally Lowe to say that she had heard Azaria cry after Mrs. Chamberlain returned to the campfire. Witness Judith West, who was camped 30 meters away, testified to hearing a dog's low, throaty growl coming from the direction of the Chamberlain's tent, a sound that she associated with growls that her husband's dogs made when he was slaughtering sheep. Evidence was also presented that adult blood also passed the test used when testing for fetal hemoglobin, and that other organic compounds can produce similar results on that particular test, including mucus from the nose and chocolate milkshakes, both of which had been present in the vehicle where Azaria was allegedly murdered, according to the prosecution. An engineer who had conducted dingo research for over a decade said that contrary to the prosecution's forensic experts' finding, a dingo's teeth can shear through material as tough as motor vehicle seat belts. He also cited an example of a captive female dingo removing a bundle of meat from its wrapping paper and leaving the paper completely intact. His evidence was, however, rejected. Further evidence to the effect that a dingo was strong enough to carry a small kangaroo was also again ignored, as well as evidence presented of the removal of a 3-year-old girl by a dingo from the back seat of a tourist's motor vehicle at the camping area just weeks before, an event that was in fact witnessed by her parents. An Aboriginal man gave evidence that his wife had tracked the dingo and found places where it had put the baby down, leaving the imprint of the baby's clothing in the soil. This evidence was, however, discounted because the man spoke on behalf of his wife, but in the first person, according to Aboriginal custom. In the end, the defence's case was rejected by the jury, and Lindy Chamberlain was convicted of murder on 29 October 1982 and sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor. Michael Chamberlain was found guilty as an accessory after the fact, but was given an 18-month suspended sentence.
When it came, the announcement took everyone across the nation completely by surprise.
The verdict came shortly before 20 to 9 Darwin time. The jury had filed back into the witness box, and Acting Chief Justice James Muirhead said to the jury, "How do you find the accused, Alice Lynn Chamberlain?" The foreman of the jury, standing, said, "Guilty."
Young woman, pregnant, in the back of a police car, in utter disbelief.
Headed for a 4x4 metre cell in the women's section of Darwin's Berrima Jail.
Appeal!
Less than a month after beginning her sentence at Berrima Prison outside of Darwin, Lindy Chamberlain gave birth to a second daughter on 17 November 1982, and they named her Kalia, with Lindy saying, "Let them try and make something out of that name then." The baby was taken away from Lindy less than a day after she was in hospital, and Lindy was returned to prison, with Kalia being released into Michael's care. Lindy regained some freedom temporarily when she was released on bail pending her first appeal, but this appeal was rejected 3-0 in April of 1983. 10 months later, Australia's High Court also refused to set aside her conviction on a 3-2 vote, and Lindy found herself back on Block J of Berrima Prison. As Lindy passed her days in a fortress on a ridge near Darwin, new reports casting doubt on the prosecution's scientific evidence helped spur a growing Free Lindy movement. Most damning of all the new reports was one showing that what the prosecution had claimed was the blood of a murdered child in the Chamberlain vehicle was in fact not even blood at all. It was paint emulsion that had been found in several other cars of the same make and year as the Chamberlains' Torana. Well over 100,000 Australians signed petitions calling for her to be released. But the country remained, however, deeply divided on the issue, with one poll showing 52% of the nation's residents believed that she was in fact guilty of murdering Azaria. In January of 1986, an English hiker would fall to his death from Ayers Rock during an evening climb, and quite unintentionally succeeded in gaining Lindy's release after so many before him had failed. On the 2nd of February 1986, 8 days after his accident, his body was discovered below the bluff where he had lost his footing, in an area full of dingo lairs. As police scoured the area looking for missing bones that might have been carried off by the dingoes, they discovered a once white jacket of a baby. Azaria's missing matinee jacket, which the police for years maintained never existed, stating that it was something that Lindy fabricated to try and mitigate why no dingo saliva was found on the other items of clothing. With Azaria's missing jacket found and supporting the Chamberlains' defense case, given the skepticism prosecutors had expressed for Lindy's story about the missing matinee jacket, there seemed little choice now. The Chief Minister ordered Lindy's release from prison.
Well, I'm stunned and amazed, but very grateful.
Grateful what?
Because I think this just goes to show once again that my wife was telling the truth.
Finally, the truth. A terrible miscarriage of justice. Authorities moved at lightning speed.
When it came, the announcement took everyone across the nation completely by surprise. Lindy Chamberlain freed from Darwin's Berrima jail.
She was ushered into a waiting car which then sped through the streets of Darwin towards the city's airport.
A judicial inquest followed Lindy's release from prison, and in this one, former prosecution witnesses had a lot of explaining to do. In May of 1987, Justice Trevor Morling issued a 379-page report critical of the investigatory techniques of some key prosecution witnesses in the trial. He put great weight on the credible accounts offered by the Chamberlains' fellow campers, noting, "It is extraordinary that the persons at the barbecue area at the time of and immediately after Azaria's disappearance accepted Mrs. Chamberlain's story and noted nothing about her appearance and conduct, suggesting that she had suddenly killed her daughter. I am far from being persuaded that Mrs. Chamberlain's account of having seen a dingo near the tent was in fact false. If the evidence before the commission had been given at the trial judge would have been obliged to direct the jury to acquit the Chamberlains." The Supreme Court found the alleged baby blood found in the Chamberlain's car, upon which the prosecution so heavily relied, could have been any substance, but it was likely that of a sound deadening compound from a manufacturing overspray. On September 15, 1988, the Northern Territory Court of Criminal Appeals unanimously quashed all convictions against Lindy and Michael Chamberlain. A few months later, the Chamberlains held a victory feast for invited guests at the Avondale College cafeteria. Among those invited by the Chamberlains were defense witnesses and lawyers, a couple whose daughter was taken from their car by a dingo, and journalists and politicians who had supported them during their long ordeal. Their lawyer, in a speech, praised the Chamberlains for being remarkably free of bitterness or self-pity. In 1988, a movie called A Cry in the Dark, starring Meryl Streep as Lindy and Sam Neill as Michael, was released, and the Chamberlains travelled to Sydney to see a preview of the movie based on their experience. Lindy stated that the movie was almost 95% accurate and stated that no other actress would have been able to play her better than Meryl Streep. Meryl also received an Academy Award nomination for her portrayal of Lindy. Sadly, in January 1990, the Chamberlains decided to divorce, and on June 27, 1991, the divorce was finalized. In their custody agreement, Kalia chose to live with Michael and visit Lindy. Regan chose to stay with Lindy and visit Michael, and Aidan divided his time between their two homes. In February 1992, Lindy met Rick Creighton during a speaking tour of the USA, and the two instantly fell in love. On 25 May 1992, compensation of $1.3 million is paid to the Chamberlains by the Northern Territory government for wrongfully imprisoning Lindy. On 20 December 1992, Rick and Lindy were married and lived in Washington in the USA. 4 months later, Lindy got custody of Kalia and Regan after they had requested to live with her. 2 years later, in 1994, Michael met and married Ingrid Bergner. Their daughter Zara was born in June of 1996. After the Chamberlains were acquitted by the Supreme Court in September of 1988 and their convictions were overturned, a third inquest in 1995 took place, with the coroner's report stating that it was a paper inquest rather than a full inquest since there was little new evidence, and the second inquest was never fully completed. The coroner considered the Morling Royal Commission's report, inquiring into the correctness of the convictions against Lindy, along with submissions made on behalf of the Chamberlains, and returned an open verdict in Azaria's cause of death. So specifically, he said that he can't for certain say that it wasn't Lindy Chamberlain that had killed Azaria, and he also couldn't prove that it was a dingo that had taken Azaria, which left her death as open. In 1998, Lindy and Rick, wishing to be closer to Lindy's aging parents and closer to Aidan, returned with Regan and Kalia to live in Australia. In October 2004, Lindy released her completely up-to-date autobiography, Through My Eyes. Lindy Chamberlain Creighton and Michael Chamberlain had continued to push for a fuller investigation of Azaria's death as caused by a dingo, and due to that, a new inquest began in February of 2012, and new figures on dingo attacks on Fraser Island had been collated by the Queensland Government's Department of Environment and Resource Management. They were then provided as evidence at this inquest. The coroner in charge of this inquest stated that this new evidence in relation to dingo attacks on infants and young children had helped convince her to reopen the investigation. And after 32 years of intense media interest and public excoriation, the Chamberlains had stated that they were unsatisfied with the bare acquittal and presumed innocence. They were keen to finally and definitively determine how their daughter died. And on 12 June 2012, that day finally came, when Coroner Morris announced her finding that the cause of Azaria's death was being taken by a dingo.
Please accept my sincere sympathy on the death of your special and loved daughter and sister, Azaria. I'm so sorry for your loss.
But still, their lives would never be the same.
So how do kids treat you about all this?
Awful.
Why?
No, I don't know. There's something against us. All the friends that I don't like tease me about it.
So what do the kids at school say to you about it all?
They say, look, like, your mum killed your baby, and brag on about that.
How do you think Mum handled jail?
I don't want to talk about that one.
Okay, mate, it's all right. Okay, well...
This battle to get to the legal truth about what caused Azaria's death has taken too long. However, I am here to tell you that you can get justice even when you think that all is lost.
Though others have suggested lawsuits against the Northern Territory and that an apology should come from them, Lindy has spoken only of forgiveness and moving on. She knows that learning to forgive is the only way she has travelled this journey, without bitterness and without incurring the damage to her life that hurt and anger inflict. She also knows that an apology given unwillingly is no apology at all. In the end, she has never given up the only true form of freedom, the freedom of her mind. So that is where we will be ending for today. Thank you so much for clicking on this video and taking time out of your day to watch it. I really do appreciate your support so very much. Please leave a like and subscribe if you've not done so already. It's a free way that you can help me out. Until next time, stay safe out there, take care of yourself, and take care of each other. Bye!